The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky terrain of Afghanistan's Kunar province. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos crouched beside a wounded soldier, her hands steady as she worked to stop the bleeding from a shrapnel wound in his leg. The sound of distant gunfire echoed through the valley, but her focus never wavered from the task at hand. Maria had been a combat medic for 8 years, serving 3 tours in some of the most dangerous regions of the Middle East. At 28, she had seen more blood and trauma than most people could imagine, yet her hands remained as steady as a surgeon's. Her fellow soldiers often joked that she could perform medical procedures in the middle of a tornado and never miss a stitch. What they didn't know was that Maria had another skill set entirely. Before joining the Army as a medic, she had grown up on a ranch in Montana, where her father taught her to shoot. By age 16, she could hit a target at 800 yards with her father's hunting rifle. When she enlisted, the Army focused on her medical training, but Maria never stopped practicing her marksmanship during her off hours. The mission that would change everything began like any other. Team Alpha, a joint unit of Army Rangers and Navy SEALs, was tasked with providing security for a medical evacuation in a remote village. Intelligence reports suggested the area was relatively quiet, with minimal enemy activity in the past month. Maria was assigned as the primary medic for the operation, responsible for stabilizing wounded Afghan civilians before they could be transported to the main hospital in Bagram. The village of Karga sat nestled between 2 steep ridgelines, connected to the outside world by a single dirt road that wound through the mountains. The local population had been caught in the crossfire between coalition forces and Taliban fighters for months. Many civilians had been injured by improvised explosive devices and needed immediate medical attention. As the convoy approached the village at dawn, Maria checked her medical supplies one final time. Her aid station would be set up in the village center, near an old mosque that had been converted into a makeshift clinic. The plan was simple: treat the wounded, load them onto helicopters, and return to base before nightfall. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, the SEAL team leader, briefed his men as their vehicles bounced along the rough road. Morrison was a veteran of 5 deployments, known for his calm demeanor under pressure and his ability to make split-second tactical decisions. His team respected him not just for his experience, but for the way he looked out for every member of the unit, regardless of their branch of service. The SEALs had worked with Maria before and held her in high regard. They had seen her run into enemy fire to reach wounded soldiers, never hesitating when lives were on the line. Morrison often said that Maria had the heart of a warrior, even though her primary job was healing rather than fighting. When the convoy reached the village, Maria immediately began setting up her aid station. The local villagers approached cautiously, some carrying injured family members. An elderly man brought his grandson, who had stepped on an old landmine 3 days earlier. A young mother carried her infant daughter, who had been burned when their home was damaged by mortar fire. Maria worked with practiced efficiency, triaging patients based on the severity of their injuries. Her translator, a local man named Hamid, helped communicate with the families. The most seriously wounded would be evacuated first, while those with minor injuries could be treated on the spot. The SEAL team established a security perimeter around the village, with snipers positioned on the surrounding ridgelines. Petty Officer First Class Tommy Rodriguez took position on the eastern ridge, about 400 meters from the village center. Through his scope, he had a clear view of the approaches to the village and could provide overwatch for the medical operation below. As Maria began treating the elderly man's grandson, she noticed that his wound was more serious than it first appeared. The explosion had damaged major blood vessels in his leg, and he was slowly bleeding to death internally. She would need to perform emergency surgery to save his life, a procedure that required her complete attention for at least 30 minutes. Meanwhile, the SEAL team maintained their vigilant watch. The mountains of Afghanistan were known for sudden attacks, and enemy fighters often used medical operations as opportunities to strike coalition forces. Morrison kept his men alert, knowing that the longer they stayed in one position, the greater the risk became. Unknown to the team, a Taliban cell had been tracking their movement since they left base that morning. The enemy fighters had positioned themselves in a cave system on the western ridge, directly opposite Rodriguez's sniper position. Their leader, an experienced commander named Khalil, had been planning this attack for weeks. Khalil knew that American forces were predictable in their medical operations. They would establish a perimeter, set up an aid station, and focus all their attention on helping civilians. This compassion, which Khalil saw as weakness, would be their downfall. His plan was to wait until the Americans were fully committed to the medical operation, then strike with coordinated fire from multiple positions. As Maria worked on the young boy's leg, she could hear the sound of helicopters approaching in the distance. The evacuation aircraft were arriving on schedule, which meant she had only minutes to stabilize the most critical patients. Her hands moved with practiced precision as she repaired the damaged blood vessels, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The village seemed too quiet. In her experience, local civilians usually gathered to watch American medical operations, curious about the procedures and grateful for the help. Today, the streets were nearly empty except for the patients and their immediate families. Even the children, who normally crowded around to watch the helicopters, were nowhere to be seen. Rodriguez noticed the same thing from his position on the ridge. Through his scope, he scanned the surrounding area for any sign of enemy movement. The silence was unsettling, like the calm before a storm. He keyed his radio to report his observations to Morrison, but before he could speak, his training kicked in as he spotted something that made his blood run cold. On the opposite ridge, partially concealed behind a large boulder, Rodriguez caught a glimpse of sunlight reflecting off metal. Someone was watching the village through binoculars or a rifle scope. He adjusted his own scope to get a better look and confirmed his worst fears. Multiple enemy fighters were positioned in the rocks above the village, and they had weapons trained on the aid station where Maria was working. Rodriguez immediately radioed Morrison with his discovery, but the situation was more complex than anyone realized. The enemy positions were expertly chosen, taking advantage of the terrain to create overlapping fields of fire. From Rodriguez's position, he could see some of the fighters, but others remained hidden behind rock formations that blocked his line of sight. Morrison quickly assessed the tactical situation and realized they were facing a carefully planned ambush. The enemy had waited until the Americans were committed to the medical operation, when moving the wounded would be difficult and abandoning the mission would mean leaving innocent civilians in danger. It was a perfect trap, designed to exploit the American military's unwillingness to leave civilians behind. The SEAL commander faced an impossible choice. He could order an immediate withdrawal, abandoning the wounded Afghan civilians to save his own men. He could call for helicopter gunship support, but the enemy positions were too close to the village, and civilian casualties would be inevitable. Or he could try to fight their way out, but the enemy held the high ground and had superior positioning. As Morrison weighed his options, Maria continued working on her patient, unaware of the danger developing around her. The young boy's condition was critical, and she estimated she needed at least 10 more minutes to complete the surgery. Moving him now would likely result in his death, but staying meant risking the lives of everyone in the unit. The sound of the approaching helicopters grew louder, and Maria could see them in the distance, black dots against the blue morning sky. The evacuation aircraft would be vulnerable during landing, and she realized that the enemy fighters were probably waiting for that moment to begin their attack. The helicopters would be easy targets as they hovered to load patients, unable to maneuver effectively in the confined space of the village landing zone. Rodriguez maintained his watch through the scope, tracking the enemy movements as best he could. He counted at least 6 fighters in positions that dominated the village, but he suspected there were more hidden in the cave system. The angle of the ridge and the positioning of the rocks meant that he could only engage a few of the targets from his current location. The Taliban fighters were armed with a mixture of AK-47 rifles and RPG launchers, weapons that would be devastatingly effective against the helicopters and the troops on the ground. Khalil had positioned his men to create a kill zone that covered the entire village center, ensuring that no one could escape once the attack began. As the helicopters approached the landing zone, Morrison made his decision. He ordered Rodriguez to take out as many enemy fighters as possible, while the rest of the team prepared to move the wounded to covered positions. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was their only chance of preventing a massacre. Rodriguez lined up his first shot through the scope, targeting the fighter he could see most clearly. The man was approximately 500 meters away, positioned behind a rock formation on the western ridge. Rodriguez controlled his breathing, just as he had been trained, and prepared to squeeze the trigger. But before he could fire, something unexpected happened that would change the entire course of the battle. From her position beside the wounded boy, Maria looked up at the sound of the helicopters and noticed something that everyone else had missed. The reflection of sunlight off metal that Rodriguez had spotted wasn't coming from the ridge where the enemy fighters were positioned. It was coming from a different location entirely, a spot that none of the SEALs could see from their current positions. Hidden in a cleft in the rocks, barely 200 meters from the aid station, was another enemy fighter with a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. This fighter had remained completely concealed until the moment when he shifted position to get a clear shot at the incoming helicopters. From where he was positioned, he could destroy both aircraft before they even touched down, killing not only the flight crews, but also eliminating any chance of evacuating the wounded. Maria's medical training had taught her to observe details that others might miss, to notice subtle changes in a patient's condition that could mean the difference between life and death. Those same observational skills now allowed her to spot the threat that could doom them all. But from her position on the ground, there was nothing she could do to warn the others in time. The enemy fighter was lining up his shot on the lead helicopter, which was beginning its descent into the landing zone. In less than 30 seconds, he would fire his RPG, and the mission would turn into a catastrophe. The only person who could possibly stop him was Maria herself, but she was a medic, not a sniper, and she had never fired a shot in combat. Yet as she looked at the wounded boy beneath her hands and thought about the helicopters full of aircrew approaching their doom, Maria knew she had to act. She was the only one who could see the threat, and she was the only one in position to stop it. The question was whether a combat medic could make a shot that even an experienced sniper would find challenging. The sound of rotor blades filled the air as the helicopters descended toward the village, their crews unaware of the danger waiting for them in the rocks above. Maria's mind raced as she calculated distances and angles. The enemy fighter with the RPG launcher was positioned approximately 200 meters northeast of her location, tucked into a rocky outcrop that provided perfect concealment from the SEAL overwatch positions. From where she knelt beside her patient, she had perhaps 20 seconds before the helicopters entered the kill zone. Without taking her eyes off the threat, Maria reached for her M4 rifle, which lay beside her medical kit. Standard issue for combat medics, the weapon was equipped with an ACOG scope suitable for engagements up to 400 meters. She had zeroed the rifle herself just 2 weeks earlier during a training exercise, and she knew its capabilities intimately. The wounded Afghan boy stirred beneath her hands, his breathing shallow but stable. Maria had managed to clamp the severed artery and pack the wound with gauze. He would survive if he could be evacuated within the next hour. But none of that would matter if the helicopters were shot down and the Taliban fighters overran their position. Through her peripheral vision, Maria could see Rodriguez on the eastern ridge, his rifle trained on targets she couldn't observe from her angle. The other SEALs were spread throughout the village, taking cover behind buildings and walls, but none of them could see the immediate threat to the approaching aircraft. The lead helicopter, a UH-60 Blackhawk, was now less than 50 feet above the landing zone, its downwash creating a cloud of dust and debris. The pilot was following standard procedures, approaching slowly to avoid brownout conditions that could lead to a crash. The aircraft was completely vulnerable, hanging in the air like a target at a shooting gallery. Maria lifted her rifle and peered through the ACOG scope, her muscle memory taking over despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The reticle centered on the rocky outcrop where she had spotted the RPG fighter. For a moment, she couldn't see him clearly through the scope's 4-power magnification. The angle was difficult, shooting upward at a target that was partially concealed behind natural cover. Then the fighter moved, adjusting his position to track the descending helicopter, and Maria got her first clear look at him through the scope. He was a young man, probably in his 20s, wearing the typical mix of civilian clothing and military gear favored by Taliban fighters. The RPG launcher rested on his shoulder, and she could see his finger on the trigger mechanism. Maria's father had taught her that shooting was 90% mental preparation and 10% physical execution. "Take your time in a hurry," he used to say, meaning that even under pressure, the fundamentals remained the same. Breathing, sight picture, trigger control, follow-through. The same principles that applied to hunting deer in Montana applied to saving lives in Afghanistan. She controlled her breathing, taking a deep breath and exhaling halfway before holding it steady. The crosshairs settled on the fighter's center mass, the largest target area that would ensure a hit, even if her aim wasn't perfect. At 200 meters, with minimal wind and good visibility, it should have been an easy shot for someone with her training. But Maria had never fired at another human being, and she felt the weight of that decision in the split second before she squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked, the sound sharp and clear above the noise of the approaching helicopters. Maria immediately worked the bolt to chamber another round, maintaining her sight picture through the scope. The 5.56mm projectile crossed the distance to the target in less than a quarter of a second, striking the enemy fighter in the chest just as he was about to fire his RPG. The impact knocked the man backward, the rocket-propelled grenade launching harmlessly into the air to explode against the mountainside 50 meters above the village. The fighter tumbled from his concealed position, his weapon clattering down the rocky slope as he fell. Maria kept her scope trained on the area for several more seconds, ensuring that the threat was neutralized, before lowering her rifle. The shot had been heard throughout the valley, but in the confusion of the moment, most people assumed it had come from Rodriguez on the ridge. Only Lieutenant Commander Morrison, who had been watching the helicopter's approach, noticed that Maria had been aiming upward at the exact moment the RPG exploded harmlessly in the distance. Morrison's tactical mind immediately understood what had happened. As a SEAL officer, he was trained to assess situations quickly and identify threats that others might miss. The trajectory of the RPG, the timing of the rifle shot, and Maria's position all pointed to one conclusion. The combat medic had just prevented a catastrophe that none of his men had even seen coming. But there was no time to process the implications. The sound of Maria's rifle shot had triggered the main Taliban attack, and enemy fighters throughout the surrounding ridges opened fire on the village. The carefully planned ambush was now unfolding, even though the primary target, the helicopters, had survived thanks to Maria's intervention. Rodriguez immediately engaged the targets he could see from his position, his sniper rifle reaching out to eliminate enemy fighters at distances exceeding 600 meters. The distinctive crack of his .300 Winchester Magnum echoed across the valley as he systematically engaged the most dangerous threats. His years of training and combat experience showed as he moved from target to target with mechanical precision. The other SEALs in the village took cover behind walls and buildings, returning fire with their assault rifles while trying to identify enemy positions. The Taliban fighters had chosen their ambush site well, with multiple positions that provided overlapping fields of fire and excellent concealment. Muzzle flashes from AK-47s erupted from seemingly every direction. Maria found herself in an impossible situation. Her primary responsibility was to continue treating wounded civilians, but the incoming enemy fire made it dangerous to remain in the open aid station. The young Afghan boy needed constant medical attention to prevent him from bleeding to death, yet staying beside him meant exposing herself to increasingly accurate enemy fire. The Black Hawk helicopter that Maria had saved managed to land despite the chaos erupting around it. The crew chief immediately began loading the most critically wounded patients, working with practiced efficiency while bullets cracked overhead. The pilot kept the engines running, ready to take off the moment the aircraft was loaded. Morrison made a tactical decision that demonstrated his experience and his trust in his team. Rather than trying to fight their way out of the ambush, he ordered his men to establish a defensive perimeter around the aid station while they completed the medical evacuation. It was a risky strategy, but it was the only way to save the wounded civilians who had already been loaded onto stretchers. The second helicopter, seeing the firefight in progress, executed a combat landing at the edge of the village. The aircrew immediately began providing suppressive fire with door-mounted machine guns, raking the ridge lines where enemy muzzle flashes could be seen. The heavy machine guns forced the Taliban fighters to keep their heads down, reducing the accuracy and volume of their return fire. Maria continued working on her patient despite the bullets flying around her. She had moved the boy to a partially protected position behind a low stone wall, but she remained exposed from several directions. Her hands never stopped moving as she monitored his vital signs and adjusted his IV fluids, even as she could hear the distinctive whistle of bullets passing close to her position. A young SEAL named Petty Officer Second Class Mike Chen noticed Maria's exposed position and moved to provide cover for her. Chen was new to the team on his first deployment, but he had already proven himself during previous operations. He positioned himself between Maria and the most dangerous enemy fire lanes, using his body armor and weapon to shield her while she worked. "Doc, you need to move," Chen shouted over the noise of battle, using the universal military nickname for medics. "We can carry the kid to better cover." Maria shook her head, not looking up from her patient. "If we move him now, he'll die," she called back. "The artery is barely holding. Give me 3 more minutes." Chen nodded and adjusted his position to provide better protection. He had seen enough wounded soldiers to understand that Maria knew what she was talking about. If she said the boy needed 3 more minutes, then his job was to keep them both alive for 3 more minutes. The firefight intensified as more Taliban fighters joined the battle from positions deeper in the mountains. The enemy had obviously planned this operation carefully, with reserves positioned to reinforce the initial assault. Radio chatter indicated that enemy fighters were moving to block the road that led out of the valley, attempting to trap the American forces in the village. Rodriguez, still providing overwatch from the eastern ridge, found himself in a deadly game of cat and mouse with an enemy sniper who had taken position somewhere on the opposite mountainside. The enemy marksman was skilled, and Rodriguez could see the impact of his bullets striking the rocks around his position with increasing accuracy. "I've got a shooter trying to zero me," Rodriguez reported over the radio. "He's good. Real good." Morrison acknowledged the report while coordinating the defensive positions throughout the village. The Taliban attack was more sophisticated than intelligence reports had suggested, with multiple layers of assault that demonstrated careful planning and training. This wasn't a ragtag group of local fighters. This was an organized military operation. The enemy sniper fired again, and this time Rodriguez felt the bullet pass close enough to his head that he could feel the displaced air. He immediately rolled to a new position, knowing that staying in one place too long would be fatal. Through his scope, he searched for any sign of the enemy marksman's location. Maria finished securing the Afghan boy's wound and signaled to Chen that they could move him to the helicopter. The young SEAL immediately called for assistance, and 2 more team members helped carry the stretcher toward the waiting Black Hawk. Enemy bullets kicked up dust around their feet as they ran, but they made it to the aircraft without being hit. As soon as the wounded boy was loaded, the Black Hawk lifted off, climbing rapidly to escape the enemy fire. The pilot executed a tactical departure, using the terrain to mask his flight path while gaining altitude. Within seconds, the aircraft had disappeared behind the ridgeline, carrying its precious cargo toward the hospital in Bagram. But the departure of the first helicopter didn't end the danger. Enemy fire was becoming more accurate as the Taliban fighters adjusted their aim and began to work together more effectively. Morrison realized that his team was in serious trouble unless they could either eliminate the enemy positions or find a way to break contact and withdraw. That's when Maria did something that surprised everyone, including herself. Instead of staying with the remaining wounded in the aid station, she grabbed her rifle and moved to a position where she could see the ridgeline where the enemy sniper was hiding. Rodriguez had been unable to locate the threat from his angle, but Maria's position in the village gave her a different perspective. Through her ACOG scope, Maria scanned the rocky terrain methodically, looking for any sign of movement or concealment that might indicate an enemy position. Her father had taught her to hunt, not just by looking for the animal, but by looking for signs that an animal was present: disturbed vegetation, unnatural shadows, anything that didn't belong in the natural environment. After several minutes of careful observation, Maria spotted what she was looking for. High on the western ridge, partially concealed behind a pile of rocks that looked natural but was actually carefully constructed, she could see the faint outline of a rifle barrel. The enemy sniper had created an excellent hide, but he had made the mistake of allowing his weapon to protrude just far enough to catch the light. The distance was approximately 400 meters, near the maximum effective range of her M4 rifle. The target was small, partially concealed, and positioned at an angle that made precise shot placement critical. It was exactly the kind of shot that required not just marksmanship skills, but the kind of instinctive understanding of ballistics and wind effects that came from years of practice. Maria settled into a stable firing position, using a broken wall to support her rifle. She studied the target through her scope, noting the slight wind that was moving dust around the valley floor. At 400 meters, even a light breeze could throw off her point of impact by several inches. Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio. "He's lining up another shot. I can't see him, but I can tell from the angle of the incoming fire." Maria centered her crosshairs on the barely visible rifle barrel, knowing that if she was wrong about the location, Rodriguez would likely be killed by the next enemy bullet. She controlled her breathing, just as she had been taught, and began applying pressure to the trigger with the pad of her index finger. The rifle fired, and Maria immediately observed her shot through the scope. 400 meters away, the enemy rifle disappeared from view, followed by the sight of a body tumbling down the rocky slope. The threat that had been pinning down Rodriguez was eliminated, and the SEAL sniper was free to resume engaging other targets throughout the valley. "Threat down," Maria reported quietly into her radio, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she had just accomplished. Morrison heard the transmission and realized that his combat medic had just made 2 precision shots under fire, eliminating threats that his trained snipers couldn't even see. It was a level of marksmanship that most soldiers never achieved, combined with the situational awareness and tactical understanding that marked the difference between good soldiers and exceptional ones. The elimination of the enemy sniper marked the beginning of the end for the Taliban ambush. Rodriguez was now free to engage targets throughout the valley, and his precision fire began systematically eliminating the enemy fighting positions. The remaining Taliban fighters, realizing that their carefully planned attack was falling apart, began to withdraw deeper into the mountains. Within 20 minutes, the valley was quiet again. The second helicopter landed to evacuate the remaining wounded civilians, and the convoy prepared to depart the village. As the SEALs conducted a final sweep of the area, Morrison approached Maria, who had returned to treating an elderly woman with shrapnel wounds. "Doc," Morrison said, his voice carrying a tone of respect that hadn't been there before, "that was some shooting." Maria looked up from her patient, her hands still covered in blood from the medical procedures. "I just did what needed to be done, sir," she replied simply. The convoy's return journey to Forward Operating Base Chapman passed in relative silence, each member of the team processing what had happened in the village. For the SEALs, it had been another successful mission, but they all understood that the outcome could have been very different without Maria's intervention. The 2 precision shots she had made under combat conditions were being discussed in hushed tones throughout the vehicles. Rodriguez rode in the same vehicle as Maria, and he couldn't stop thinking about how she had saved his life. The enemy sniper had been systematically zeroing in on his position, and the next shot would likely have been fatal. But Maria had seen something that he, with all his training and experience, had missed entirely. Her shot had been perfect, a 400-meter precision engagement that many trained snipers would struggle to make under ideal conditions. "Doc," Rodriguez said quietly as they bounced along the mountain road, "where did you learn to shoot like that?" Maria continued cleaning her medical equipment, her movements methodical and practiced. "My father taught me when I was young," she replied without looking up. "We used to hunt together back in Montana. He always said that shooting was just another tool, like being able to drive a truck or change a tire. Something every person should know how to do properly." Rodriguez nodded, but he knew there was more to it than that. He had grown up around hunters and recreational shooters, and while many of them were competent marksmen, very few could perform under the pressure of combat. What Maria had demonstrated in the village went beyond basic marksmanship skills. She had shown the kind of instinctive tactical awareness and precision shooting ability that took years to develop. When the convoy reached FOB Chapman, word of the day's events had already spread throughout the base. The helicopter crews had reported the successful evacuation and the circumstances that had made it possible. Within hours, Maria found herself being summoned to the base commander's office, still wearing her blood-stained uniform from the medical operations. Colonel James Harrison had been commanding officer of FOB Chapman for 8 months, and he had seen his share of heroic actions during that time. But the reports he was receiving about Staff Sergeant Santos were unusual enough to warrant his personal attention. According to multiple witnesses, a combat medic had made 2 precision shots that prevented what could have been a catastrophic ambush. "Sergeant Santos," Colonel Harrison said as Maria entered his office, "I've been hearing some interesting stories about your actions in the field today." Maria stood at attention, unsure why she was being called to see the colonel. "Sir, I was just doing my job. The wounded civilians needed evacuation, and there were threats to the aircraft. I did what was necessary to complete the mission." Colonel Harrison gestured for her to sit down. He had reviewed her personnel file before the meeting and was impressed by what he found. Maria had an exemplary record as a combat medic, with commendations for courage under fire and outstanding medical care. But there was no mention of advanced marksmanship training or sniper qualifications. "Tell me about your shooting background, Sergeant," the colonel requested. "According to Lieutenant Commander Morrison, you made 2 precision shots today that even his experienced snipers couldn't have taken from their positions." Maria explained her childhood experience with hunting and target shooting, emphasizing that her father had been very thorough in teaching her the fundamentals. She mentioned that she had continued practicing during her military service, but had never received formal sniper training from the Army. Colonel Harrison listened carefully, asking detailed questions about the specific circumstances of each shot. The more he heard, the more convinced he became that Maria possessed natural shooting ability that was being wasted in her current role. While combat medics were critically important, someone with her combination of medical skills and marksmanship talent could be invaluable in special operations. "Sergeant, I want you to report to the base shooting range tomorrow morning," Colonel Harrison ordered. "Master Sergeant Williams will be conducting an informal assessment of your shooting abilities. This isn't punishment or additional duty. I'm simply trying to understand the full extent of your capabilities." Maria left the colonel's office confused about what would happen next. She had never considered herself anything more than an incompetent marksman who happened to be good at her job as a medic. The idea that her shooting skills might lead to changes in her military career hadn't occurred to her. Master Sergeant David Williams had been the base's senior marksmanship instructor for 3 years. A former Marine Corps sniper with combat experience in both Iraq and Afghanistan, he had seen hundreds of soldiers attempt to qualify for advanced shooting programs. Most of them were enthusiastic, but lacked the natural talent and discipline required for precision marksmanship. When Maria reported to the shooting range the next morning, Williams had already set up a series of tests designed to evaluate different aspects of marksmanship ability. He started with basic prone position shooting at known distances, then progressed to more challenging scenarios involving unknown distances, awkward shooting positions, and time pressure. Maria approached each test methodically, applying the lessons her father had taught her years earlier. She focused on the fundamentals: breathing, sight picture, trigger control, and follow-through, while trying to ignore the pressure of being evaluated. Williams observed silently, taking notes on a clipboard and occasionally adjusting the difficulty of the tests. After 2 hours of shooting, Williams had seen enough. Maria's performance was exceptional, particularly her ability to estimate distance and compensate for environmental factors. Her shooting positions were textbook perfect, and she demonstrated the kind of patience and precision that separated skilled marksmen from recreational shooters. "Sergeant Santos," Williams said as they cleaned up the shooting positions, "in 20 years of training shooters, I've rarely seen natural ability like yours. Have you ever considered applying for sniper school?" Maria looked up from cleaning her rifle, surprised by the suggestion. "No, Master Sergeant. I've always been focused on being the best medic I can be. I never thought about other specialties." Williams nodded thoughtfully. "The Army has a program that trains soldiers in multiple specialties. You could maintain your medical qualifications while adding precision marksmanship to your skill set. Special operations units are always looking for people who can fill multiple roles on small teams." That afternoon, Williams submitted his evaluation to Colonel Harrison with a recommendation that Maria be considered for advanced marksmanship training. The assessment indicated that she possessed the natural ability, temperament, and discipline required for sniper operations, while maintaining her value as a combat medic. Word of Maria's shooting abilities spread throughout FOB Chapman and eventually reached higher headquarters. Within a week, she received orders to report to the Special Operations Training Center for evaluation by instructors from the Army's most elite units. The possibility of serving with Special Forces teams who required both medical and precision shooting capabilities was being seriously considered. Lieutenant Commander Morrison heard about the potential assignment and requested a meeting with Maria before she departed for the training center. As they walked around the base perimeter in the early evening, Morrison shared his thoughts about the unique opportunity she was being offered. "Doc, what you did in that village was extraordinary," Morrison said. "You saved lives with your medical skills and your marksmanship. There aren't many people who can do both at the level you demonstrated." Maria had been thinking about the same thing since receiving her new orders. The idea of serving in a dual role appealed to her because it combined her desire to help people with her natural shooting ability. She could save lives through medical care and protect her teammates through precision fire when necessary. "Sir, do you think I'm making the right decision?" Maria asked. "Part of me feels like I should stick with what I know best." Morrison stopped walking and turned to face her. "Maria, in my 15 years of military service, I've learned that the best soldiers are the ones who can adapt to whatever the mission requires. You've proven that you can do both jobs when it matters most. The special operations community needs people like you." 3 weeks later, Maria found herself at Fort Bragg, beginning an intensive training program that would prepare her for assignment to special operations units. The course combined advanced medical training with sniper qualification, creating a unique skill set that was increasingly valuable in modern military operations. The training was demanding, both physically and mentally. Maria had to master advanced trauma medicine techniques while simultaneously learning the complex skills required for precision shooting at extended ranges. She studied ballistics, weather effects, camouflage and concealment, and target detection while maintaining her medical certifications. Her instructors quickly recognized the same natural ability that Master Sergeant Williams had identified. Maria's shooting groups were consistently tight, even at distances exceeding 800 meters. More importantly, she demonstrated the patience and discipline required for sniper operations, remaining motionless for hours while observing potential targets. The medical training was equally demanding. Special operations medics were expected to perform life-saving procedures under the most challenging conditions imaginable. They had to be capable of everything from treating gunshot wounds to performing emergency surgery in the field, often while under enemy fire. After 6 months of intensive training, Maria graduated at the top of her class in both specialties. She received the Military Occupational Specialty designation that qualified her as both a Special Operations Combat Medic and a qualified sniper. It was a rare combination that made her eligible for assignment to the military's most elite units. Her first assignment came with the 75th Ranger Regiment, where her unique skill set was immediately appreciated by unit commanders. Rangers operated in small teams that often found themselves in situations where having both medical and precision shooting capabilities in a single person was invaluable. During her first deployment with the Rangers, Maria participated in dozens of operations throughout Afghanistan and Iraq. Her medical skills saved the lives of both American soldiers and local civilians, while her marksmanship abilities proved crucial in several firefights where precision shots were needed to protect the team. Other special operations units began requesting Maria's services for specific missions that required her unique combination of abilities. She found herself working with Navy SEALs, Army Special Forces, and Air Force Special Operations teams, always filling the critical role of team medic while serving as a backup sniper when needed. Rodriguez, who had remained in touch with Maria throughout her training, wasn't surprised by her success in special operations. He often told other SEALs about the day when a combat medic had saved his life with a 400-meter shot that he couldn't make himself. The story became legendary within the special operations community, illustrating the importance of recognizing and developing talent wherever it might be found. 5 years after that fateful day in the Afghan village, Maria had become one of the most respected soldiers in the special operations community. She had been promoted to Sergeant First Class and had trained dozens of other soldiers in both medical and marksmanship skills. Her story was used as an example in military leadership courses about the importance of recognizing hidden talents and providing opportunities for soldiers to develop their full potential. The young Afghan boy whose life Maria had saved in the village grew up to become a translator for coalition forces, eventually immigrating to the United States with his family. He never forgot the American soldier who had saved his life while bullets were flying around her, and he often told his children about the brave woman who put his welfare above her own safety. Colonel Harrison, who had first recognized the significance of Maria's shooting ability, retired from the Army as a brigadier general. In his farewell speech, he cited Maria's story as an example of why good leaders must always be alert for exceptional talent in unexpected places. Her transformation from combat medic to special operations sniper demonstrated how a single moment of recognition could change not only an individual's career, but potentially save countless lives in the future. Master Sergeant Williams continued training shooters at various military installations, always looking for the next soldier who might possess the rare combination of natural ability and mental toughness required for precision marksmanship. He kept a photograph on his desk showing Maria receiving her sniper qualification. which he used to remind students that exceptional shooting ability could come from the most unexpected backgrounds. The village of Karga, where Maria had first demonstrated her remarkable shooting skills, was eventually secured by Afghan government forces and became a symbol of successful cooperation between coalition troops and local civilians. A small medical clinic was established there, providing healthcare services that helped improve life for families throughout the region. Lieutenant Commander Morrison continued serving with the Navy SEALs, eventually becoming a commanding officer responsible for training the next generation of special operations personnel. He frequently used Maria's story in his leadership training, emphasizing how the best teams were built by recognizing and utilizing every team member's unique capabilities. The lessons learned from that day in the Afghan village extended far beyond Maria's individual career. Military leaders began paying closer attention to the hidden talents within their units, recognizing that valuable skills might be found in unexpected places. Training programs were developed to identify and develop soldiers who possessed multiple capabilities that could be valuable in special operations. Maria's story became required reading at the Army's leadership schools, illustrating several important principles about effective military leadership. It demonstrated the importance of thorough personnel evaluation, the value of cross-training in multiple specialties, and the critical need for leaders to remain alert for exceptional talent, regardless of a soldier's current role or assignment. 10 years after making those two crucial shots in the Afghan village, Maria had achieved the rank of Master Sergeant and was serving as a senior instructor at the Army's Special Operations Medical Training Center. She was responsible for training the next generation of special operations medics, teaching them not only advanced medical procedures, but also the tactical awareness and secondary skills that could mean the difference between mission success and failure. Her students came from every branch of the military, and Maria made sure each of them understood that their primary role as medics should never prevent them from developing other capabilities that might prove valuable in combat. She taught them to be observers, to notice threats that others might miss, and to be prepared to step outside their comfort zones when the situation demanded it. The two shots that Maria had made in that remote Afghan village continued to resonate throughout the special operations community. They represented not just exceptional marksmanship under pressure, but the kind of adaptability and multiple capabilities that modern military operations required. Her story had become a testament to the importance of recognizing talent wherever it might be found and providing opportunities for exceptional soldiers to reach their full potential.